Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dr. Hamis Bishane, and I'll be the one chairing the meeting today. So welcome, everyone. We'll just let a few more people in, and then we can start. Just 1 more minute. I think we are at 32. Seems the number is not increasing. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Tinashe. Hi, Ayesha. Look more. Welcome. Yeah, I think people are still getting in with us. 37. Hi, Siobhan. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Sherry. Great. People are still coming in. Welcome to today's webinar. And the webinar is on the role of stigma in PrEP uptake and continuation among AGYW, that's adolescent girls and young women, looking at considerations for program implementers. Welcome, everyone. I saw, all right, just 1 more minute because people are still streaming in, and then we'll start. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Hi, Patience. Hi, Beauty. Welcome. Okay, I think we can start now. We're a good number. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dr. Hamis Kishane, working an AYP champion in Kenya, working in the National AIDS and STI Control Program as a program lead. And today's webinar is on the role of stigma in PrEP in uptake and continuation among the adolescent girls and young women. Welcome, everyone. I'm just gonna share the objectives for today's meeting, and then give a few housekeeping rules, and then we can go on. So the objectives for today are to share the findings from the evidence review focusing on strategies to address stigma related to PrEP uptake and continuation. Would also want to create a space for champions and other stakeholders to engage further on the topic and reflect on how the findings can be applied in AGYW as well as AYP HIV prevention programs, and also give champions an opportunity to share their experiences and knowledge on what is going on in their countries in terms of AGYW programming and PrEP. The housekeeping rules are as indicated earlier. I don't know if we were able to look at that. Please say hi in the group and write off your name and where you work. It would be nice to know who is in the room. Also, click the round icon that's on you can see it on the screen, and choose your preferred language, it's English or Portuguese. And then if you want to say something, if you'd like to make a comment or raise a question, please raise your hand and you'll be picked so that you can speak on during the discussion. So before we start, we'll have a Mentimeter. And I'll throw that to the next speaker to take us through what will be asked in the Mentimeter.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thanks very much, Dr. Hermes. We will be using this Mentimeter today. You can use your phone, tablet, or laptop. And there are 3 ways you can access the site. If you're using your phone, you can use the QR code that you see on the screen now. Scanning it will take you directly to our page on Mentimeter. On your phone, laptop, or tablet, you can also go to the website, www.menti.com, and enter the code 644619668, as is up here on the screen, as you can see. All right, and then the link should be in the chat as well. So we'll give everyone a minute or 2 to get there. And if you can, please, can you click thumbs up once you've completed it? We're really keen to know who you are, where you're from, and the work you do. So please, if you can still complete the Mentimeter, even if you have put your details in the chat. We'd like to know what type of organization you're affiliated with, what work you do within that organization. Just a reminder that you can use your phone and use the QR code on the screen now, or you can enter into the website that's in the chat, that Sherry has put in the chat. Great. I think we're going to continue now with the program. Thanks, everyone, for completing the Mentimeter and for putting your names in the chat. And thank you again for joining this SYCONA dissemination webinar. We're delighted that so many of the AGYW and PrEP champions are able to join us this afternoon. And we welcome colleagues as well from the SSLN, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, WHO, and the Global Fund. I'm going to give some background and context to the SYCONA initiative and to the webinar, and then I'll introduce our speakers. Some of you are familiar with SYCONA, but some may not be. Essentially, SYCONA is an HIV prevention initiative led by Genesis Analytics in partnership with the Population Council, and it's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We work very closely with the SSLN and interface with the same national HIV prevention champions, particularly the AGYW champions. But there are some differences, and I know there is sometimes confusion, but these are the differences. Firstly, SYCONA is focused very much on evidence and bringing evidence to programs. Secondly, we work in 8 rather than 15 countries, and at the moment, we only focus on the AGYW pillar, rather than all 5 prevention pillars. And also, lastly, and importantly, we also work at subnational level, as well as national level. So our aim is to strengthen national and subnational AGYW programs through relevant, high-quality evidence. We do this by reviewing and synthesizing selected and contextualized research in response to evidence gaps that have been identified by the AGYW champions. So the reviews we do are based on gaps that have been identified, research gaps and knowledge gaps that have been identified by national champions. And in addition to evidence reviews, we also document case studies of good practice and lessons learned. A very important element of SYCONA is the facilitated dissemination of knowledge products from the reviews and case studies. This evidence review on how stigma affects PrEP uptake amongst AGYW is one of a series of reviews that SYCONA is working on. And there are several other topics. These include male engagement, meaningful youth engagement, effective combination prevention packages for AGYW, and sustainability. We seek to develop evidence products that are easy to access and read, relevant, and importantly, are applicable to HIV prevention programs for AGYW. To this end, the presentation today is specifically designed for national HIV programs rather than for a scientific or academic audience. We will share the review very soon after today's webinar, and I do hope that you will have time to reflect on the contents. In the meantime, I trust that the presentation will be engaging, and we encourage you to ask questions and to contribute to the discussion. Our speakers today are the 2 researchers who worked on this review, Dr. Waymar Tan from the Population Council and Lulama Lunika. I'm going to just share a short bio for Waymar and Lulama. So Dr. Waymar Tan is a senior research associate in the Social Behavioral Sciences Research Unit of the Population Council. She's an epidemiologist and social behavioral researcher with 20 years of experience designing, implementing, and evaluating interventions to improve access to HIV and sexual and reproductive health services, particularly among the most underserved and marginalized. She has substantial experience building evidence for and providing technical assistance to organizations and ministries of health, specifically to inform HIV programs in sub-Saharan Africa. Waymar led the PrEP and stigma evidence review that will be presented now. Lulama and Lunika worked very closely with Waymar on the evidence review. She's a senior associate at Genesis Analytics. She has been a public health professional for over 7 years, working primarily in HIV prevention and treatment, research, and M&E. She's the program manager for the South to South Learning Network, which many of you are familiar with. And the network supports 15 African countries to optimize their HIV prevention programs. Previously, Lulama supported the South African National Department of Health's rollout of PrEP into public clinics while she was at the Clinton Health Access Initiative. She's currently completing her master's in epidemiology and biostatistics at the School of Public Health at Wits University and holds a degree in biology. So thank you very much, Waymar and Lulama. Thank you for all the work thus far, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about what the review showed.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for that introduction, Renee. Okay, great. Thanks for the slide. So, yes, so thank you, everyone, and I'm really excited to see the turnout, and it looks like we have a nice variety of champions from the country. So we're really looking forward to getting some feedback on this work that we've done on the role of stigma and PrEP uptake among AGYW in the SSLN country. So first, I'm going to give you a brief background on what our goals were for this synthesis and a quick overview of the methods, and then we'll go straight into the interesting findings. So, as you know from your own experiences with HIV programming and from the literature, AGYW have had significant challenges initiating and continuing oral PrEP, with stigma being one of the main barriers. The East and Southern African champions at the outset of this project, working on HIV prevention for AGYW, identified this topic as an area in which they wanted to learn about more and to get some guidance. So while there's been evidence around stigma as a barrier, there was a need to break down what does the stigma look like with regard to PrEP specifically among AGYW and what it's being done to address it. So we conducted a rapid review to fill this knowledge gap. So we included peer-reviewed articles as well as articles from the gray literature from the recent years, and we found quite a few, but primarily much of the work was from South Africa and Kenya. So next. So I'm going to pass it on to Lulama to give you starting with some of the findings.
Thank you, Waymar, and good afternoon to everybody on the call. So as Waymar said, I'm going to jump right into the findings, and if we could summarize everything that we found in this review into one slide, or into kind of a nice framework or a nice figure, it would be this figure that you're seeing on the screen. And so in the middle circle of the figure, you'll see that we were able to kind of categorize or bucket the different types of stigma into three kind of main areas. So the one was HIV-related stigma, which was stigma due to being incorrectly perceived as having HIV. And the second was stigma related to sexual activity and promiscuity. The third was stigma related to sex work. And so all of these three types of stigma would kind of manifest or show up in either an anticipated way. So anticipated would mean expecting negative reactions or rejection from others, or experienced stigma, which was undergoing kind of a real act of discrimination and stigma from others. And then we had kind of this interesting or found this interesting interplay with disclosure, where stigma influences disclosure of PrEP use, but disclosure can also combat stigma. And so I'll talk more about this later. Go to the next slide. So in terms of stigma due to being incorrectly perceived as having HIV, what we found was the similar pill appearance and packaging of PrEP and ARVs really affected, the uptake and use of PrEP. So people experienced both anticipated and experienced stigma related to being incorrectly regarded as HIV positive because of the similar pill aperients of PrEP and ARVs. Then PrEP collection at ARC clinics, PrEP was often provided from ARC clinics or in the same area within the clinic where ART was provided. And so many AGYW were not interested in taking PrEP from an ARC clinic due to the stigma associated with HIV. Then with male partners' perceptions, so male partners specifically expressed fear that their female partners' PrEP use would lead others to assume that they themselves, the male partners, were HIV infected. So male partners were uncomfortable with being associated with HIV, and that enhanced kind of stigma in that way. In terms of social and cultural norms, which perpetuate stigma related to adolescent sexual activity and perceived promiscuity, this showed up quite a bit with regards to healthcare workers. So healthcare workers who were generally accepting of PrEP and AGYW. PrEP for AGYW, many had held, biased attitudes about adolescents being sexually active, which is this idea that the girls should wait until they're 18 or older to have sex. And these healthcare workers were concerned that their provision of PrEP could be seen as condoning sex among AGYW and felt this moral responsibility to protect AGYW from engaging in sex and would much rather be comfortable not, providing PrEP. But PrEP was also seen by community healthcare workers and partners as being associated with promiscuity. So if you were using PrEP, you could be seen as someone who is very promiscuous or has high, multiple partners or just high sexual activity. Which wasn't necessarily the case, and so we see that in relationship as well with PrEP and it's promoting sexual promiscuity among AGYW. If you go to the next slide, when it comes to stigma related to selling sex, PrEP use was also associated with sex workers. And I think it has to do a lot with how PrEP was initially rolled out in the countries that we focused this review in. PrEP was initially prioritized for high-risk key populations such as sex workers. And so in some cases, when you're using PrEP, you could be seen to be selling sex or be a sex worker. And for AGYW who sell sex in particular, they faced multiple layers of stigma. So they would face all the different kinds of stigma I've highlighted so far, kind of all at the same time. And so programs for AGYW who sell sex need to address these different types of stigma to support PrEP use. If you go to the next slide, and this is my last slide, and then I'll hand over to Waymar, is this interplay of disclosure that I was talking about earlier, which is that disclosure of oral PrEP can either be a facilitator or a barrier of PrEP use. And the difference between whether it's a facilitator or barrier really comes down to the experiences around the disclosure for the AGYW. So if they're negative disclosure experiences, which would lead to kind of less support and ultimately lead to poor PrEP use and discontinued PrEP. Where there were positive disclosure experiences, there would be more support and better PrEP use. But the key message or the key takeaway message here is that disclosure can be a very powerful way to combat PrEP stigma and ultimately improve PrEP use. So I'll hand over to Waymar, who will take you through what this means for you as a program implementer.
Great, thanks so much, Lulama. So I'd like to move on to now the summary of the different strategies that AGYW programs have used to reduce stigma related to PrEP. So while these strategies have not been rigorously evaluated, there are still important lessons that we can take from their implementation. So let's look at this figure here. So one thing that's clear from our review is that interventions need to take place at different levels. So we need to think of intervening from the side of increasing demand for PrEP among AGYW, which is reflected on the green side of this figure, as well as intervening from the side of service provision. So think of it as like the supply side, which is the blue side. So for example, to intervene on the demand side, the green side, we can think of intervening at the level of the AGYW, the inner circle, and working all the way out to the level of the community. And from the health services side, the service provision side, the blue side, we can intervene at the provider level, the health systems level, and all the way out to the scientific level to reduce stigma. And so we really need to think about how these different levels can be used as we think about how we can reduce stigma related to PrEP. And I'll go into each of these levels in detail in the following slides. Next, thanks. So first, looking at some strategies used to address stigma to increase demand and use of PrEP. So various strategies have been used at AGYW level, partner and family level, as well as the community level. And I'll give you examples from each of these levels in the following slides. Next. Next. Okay, yes. So here, let's look at the examples at the AGYW level. Now, the Jalindi project, PrEP project in Kenya, used segmentation to group the end users of the AGYW potential end users by behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs, as opposed to grouping them by demographics simply. So through this process, they recognized 4 different types of AGYW, and they tailored the messages to these different types of AGYW. So for example, for the young woman who wants to see PrEP connected to fun and interesting life, the message could be something along the lines of PrEP keeps me on top of my game. But then for the young woman who wants to take care of her family, the message could be more like PrEP keeps me secure. Or for the girl who's concerned about the perception of her peers, the message would be something like PrEP is popular, using it makes me fit in. So one important thing to notice with all of these 4 different categories of messaging is that the messages are framed in a non-stigmatizing and a more positive way around PrEP. Now, the V project in South Africa focuses positioning PrEP as a self-care and empowering product. An aim of the product is to shift the narrative from don't get HIV to empower yourself. So as you can see, that's also more positive. Next. One more example at the AGYW level, the Empower Project in South Africa and Tanzania held adherence support clubs that were designed to build positive social norms around PrEP use, strengthen confidence and communication skills around disclosure. As Lola mentioned, disclosure can support PrEP use. Next. So now at the partner and the family level, the Pomoja project hosted PrEP education sessions for male partners and parents of AGYW taking PrEP so that they could support the person taking PrEP. Next. At the community level, now the goal is to introduce PrEP to the broader community using multiple modes of media. So to introduce it to the broader community to help normalize PrEP. One of the key lessons learned from the implementers was the need to promote PrEP, not only targeting key populations like sex workers or men who have sex with men, but because doing so, then PrEP then becomes perceived as only for these target groups, which could increase stigma. Another important recommendation was to ensure that PrEP is promoted in a more positive light. So something that reflects health and self-care and empowerment. And next. Now, so I'd like to move on to how programs have tried to address stigma from the other side, from the side of provision of PrEP. In the following slides, I'll speak about each of these levels, the provider level, the health systems level, and the PrEP characteristics level. I'll go into details then. Next. So here's some examples of strategies at the provider level. So one of the eight main issues related to PrEP at the provider level is the risk assessment that is conducted to determine eligibility for PrEP. So the risk assessment process, as you may know, can feel very stigmatizing and judgmental from the perspective of the client. So these two projects tweaked the process so that the risk assessment is more like a conversation, a counseling session, rather than a strict risk assessment that comes out with some risk scoring. And then another project, the Be Wise project, used a self-assessment tool, which allows the person to self-assess their risk and if they might be interested in PrEP. And if they are interested in PrEP, they will be linked to a PrEP facility. So this puts the access in the hands of the client. So it's more empowering. Next. Now, at the level of the health systems, in both the PREA and the POWER projects, demonstration projects, PrEP was integrated into other services routinely accessed by AGYW, such as MCH clinics or family planning clinics, or offered through youth mobile services. So by offering it through these kinds of outlets, it doesn't have the same stigma that would be associated, for example, with an ART clinic. And another strategy has been to decentralize PrEP services. For example, with the Pomoja project, PrEP initiation occurred at the government clinics, but subsequent follow-up appointments occurred at the community level, at community-based safe spaces for girls, but these were spaces only for girls. This meant that AGYW didn't have to go to clinics where they may be stigmatized by community members, and the oversight was done by nurses and clinical officers from the health facilities. So now at next slide, at the PrEP characteristics level. So the V project in South Africa, now this is pretty neat, provided unique appealing carrying cases for PrEP that looked like lip balm containers. As Lulama had mentioned, you know, one of the stigmatizing things is that people don't want to be carrying around ART pills or that make them look like they have HIV. So these were in lip balm containers. These were nicely packaged, as you can see from this cute carrying case. And this is much more discreet than carrying around medication bottles. So next. And just to quickly sum up, there are multiple forms and types of stigma that Lama talked about that act as a barrier to PrEP uptake. And although we need more rigorous evaluations of the strategies that's been used to address stigma around PrEP to see what really works, there have been a variety of strategies being employed at all different levels to address stigma to increase PrEP uptake and make it less stigmatizing. And I think one of the key themes that we can see that runs through the different levels of intervention is really about reframing PrEP in a more positive and empowering way, as opposed to something negative to treat an illness. So it's important for youth and the community to view PrEP as an option that allows people to take care of themselves and something that is empowering. So it's really an important shift to make towards normalizing PrEP. So I'm going to end here so that we have enough time for discussion. Okay, so before we do that, we're going to move to some Mentimeter questions to get your thoughts and hear about your experiences. It's really the point of this presentation. So if you have not entered the Menti platform, you can click on this QR code with your phone, or you can go to menti.com and enter in this code 6446-1968. So again, the code is 6446-1968. That way we can hear from you all about your experiences. I'm just going to give it a little bit of time for people to go to the Menti platform. Okay. There's still people going in. Right. Okay. 25 people in there, 30, I think. Okay. So then let's go to our first question. Okay, so which of the following aspects of stigma do you think is most difficult to address with regard to PrEP uptake among AGYW? And there are some options here, which I'll read to you. The first one is negative attitudes of providers. Next one is stigma from community. Next is stigma from family. Next is stigma from partners. Next is disclosure of PrEP use. Okay, we're getting some responses. Yeah, I know. I think all of these are very difficult. We will all agree with that. But it does look like, ooh, okay, we're leaning towards negative attitudes from providers as one of the most difficult aspects of stigma to address, followed by community. Okay, community and family. Okay, but clearly the negative attitudes from providers is one of the hardest to address, it seems like. Okay, that's really interesting to see. So we'll go to the next question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you think AGYW programs are working to address PrEP-related stigma in your country? With 1, not so well, 5 being very well. Okay, up in the middle, somewhat well, I guess, but leaning more towards not so well. Okay, I think it has stabilized. Okay, so we're in the middle, so that means we still have a long way to go to address stigma in these countries. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Do I have one more? No. No, okay. So that's it. So I'm going to pass it back to the chair because we would like to hear from 2 champions about their own experiences with PrEP programming and stigma. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wayma. And thank you, Lulama, for such a great presentation, really. PrEP has been a bit of a, the PrEP uptake has been quite low in some of our countries, and the fact that you're sharing about some of the issues that cause this uptake to be low, like the stigma and the types of stigma that is there, as well as some of the interventions that we feel probably could deal with this stigma is quite encouraging. Thank you for that, and I hope people are putting their questions down and getting ready for the next round, which is a Q&A round. Before we start, we have 2 discussants who will give a bit of their reflections on this presentation. One of them is Dr. Margaret Kagashe. She's the head of the prevention unit in the National AIDS Control Program in the Ministry of Health in Tanzania, and the founder and the lead key population, young and AGYW program for Tanzania Commission for AIDS. The next discussant will be Damaris Juma. She's in the Maisha Youth Movement, Kenya, national team lead for Maisha Youth Movement, and also the founder and executive director of GALPA organization in Kenya. Before we get other people's reflections and questions and comments, we'll probably start with those 2 as we look at stigma and PrEP. And thank you so much, Lama and Dr. Weaver, for the presentation. It was nice to also see some of our countries and some of these interventions that you're talking about. They're not just on paper, it's things that we've experienced. So over to you, Dr. Margaret Kagashe, on your reflections.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon good evening. As I've been introduced, just a bit of clarification. I worked with the Minister of Health as the lead NHIV prevention now, the lead of prevention at the National Commission. So if I recall back how the PrEP implementation in country was a bit challenging because when we were about to scale up in 2019, key issues came out. We had policy issues like how do you have any program? How do we integrate with condom? We want to kill other prevention interventions. We had also community, cultural values, norms, and beliefs. We had interpersonal issues from themselves, but we had also individual. Addressing all this, it was a bit challenging, making sure that we put PrEP on the map. That is one of the HIV prevention and part of the combination prevention. And so we were able to sit together with the professional bodies and religion leaders, family, representative of family level parenting, and discuss looking at other ministerials like Ministry of Education, Ministry of Gender, and put everyone on the same table and discuss, are we going to move with this? Because everything was shut down after AGYW being included as a target population. So the way, as it was presented, the way PrEP being introduced in the country, it was like, this is for the people who are at risk and immoral and all that are being put together. And for the AGYW to include them in that group, it was a bit challenging. But at the end of the day, it was possible, but it was put at more of now, if you want to include AGYW, make sure we have more of the how you evaluate their risk. And we had a screening tool which target only AGYW. We had a lot, including condom use if they're not using current STI, and they were classified as sex work, and that has been a challenge. So if I group the stigma around PrEP, when we did an evaluation after taking off and they include the AGYW, the main issues we are seeing, it was on the drug in itself. Truvada was classified as the HIV drug. Why should we use HIV drug? So that was another big challenge, stigma to the drug itself, because it was included on that. Also, we had facility-based, I could call providers, from everyone around that. It was a big challenge. The provider was like, you are 15 years old, or you are 16, you are here so you are selling sex now. So that was a big challenge. We were seeing this in different, it was reported by the AGYW themselves, but different angle. Also, another key issue was the community itself. As I said, we needed to sit as a nation, because we needed to address this not in a programmatic aspect, but at the national as part of the combination prevention. So the community stigma also was an issue. Cultural norms, like now we're introducing immoral. Everyone will go do sex because they know they're protected. So also another, other ministries which because we know AGYW interventions is multi-sector approach. You cannot approach on the health sector. It's everyone is needed on board to make sure this is moving. So Ministry of Education, Ministry of Gender, and all that have been put together. But on the Ministry of Education, they doesn't believe AGYW needs PrEP at that point. No, but we have a dropout of pregnancy of 42, and we are just wanted to justify, like, look, despite you are saying that they're not doing sex, but we have a dropout in some region, until 42% of the AGY, they're dropping out of school because of pregnancies. Now, can you explain that? If we don't protect them, it won't be only pregnancy. Now it will be HIV and other STIs. So that's the I'll call that the stigma around that also. And the stigma themselves, actually they stigmatize themselves looking at the cultural norms and all that around themselves, like how do I kill this bottle to at home, how my phone will look at me. So that was around, actually it was, and some continue until now. We are still working on them. And how we did it, when you look at it, we needed to have the best thing we are doing is PrEP is community-led. We are taking PrEP not in the facility, but to the community. So we take the providers, even professional bodies, actual professional bodies like pharmaceutical, they were saying, no, we don't do that. That is rational use of drug. But we were able to convince them, these people, they won't come and take PrEP because they're not sick. So we were able to take PrEP to the community. They're taking PrEP from the peer. From the providers who is from the facility, and taking them to where they are. We find them at night. It depends at what time we can find them. So that helps a lot. Also peer-led, because whoever makes demand creation is the peer-led, and directs them, this is where you can get PrEP. If you want me to bring it, I'll bring it to you. But I can connect you with the facility, because you have mandatory tests which must be done to make sure that you are safe for PrEP. So we're able to also build capacity to the forums, which include the AGYW representatives, because we have the TWG, which includes all the youth is around, which makes sure that when we build capacity to those, it helps a lot, all those associations, to make sure this message has been transferred to the targeted population. We have messages with targeting AGYW has been tested, and there are no stigma around that. So that's the main key issues. But we wanted to approach this in a nationwide, not in a programmatic way, because only a program which is done, there's when the program is over, there's nothing can continue. So we wanted to address this in a nationwide, including the religious leaders, the community leaders, family parenting, and all that in place. That's all I can say from this end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daktari. Such wonderful insights on the topic, the use of the community, and looking at the community resource persons, as we call them, as part of the team that brings the AGYWs on the table and introduce them to PrEP. That is interesting insights from your end, and I'm sure people would like to hear more about that. We'll move on to Damaris Juma and hear her insights on the same. Damaris.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamis. Please allow me to share how stigma has affected the success of PrEP programs for adolescents and young women in Kenya. So in Kenya, PrEP has been related directly with sex workers in most time since it was introduced. This has made it almost impossible for AGYW not to access prevention because of their fear of being stigmatized or associated as sex workers in the community. However, among the AGYW sex workers, PrEP use has been championed. We have facilities that have been built to specifically register sex workers on PrEP and offer other prevention services. They sensitize the sex workers, the AGYW sex workers on PrEP use, and you might realize that most of the population in Kenya that is informed on matters PrEP use comprises of the AGYW sex workers. Echoing on what Dr. Margaret has just said, in Kenya, we've been having challenge with the stigma of this is a HIV drug. Why you taking it while you are claiming to be HIV positive? So with the packaging of PrEP, which is currently being revised in Kenya, people tend to assume that someone who is on PrEP is HIV positive, leading to the stigma associated with HIV and AIDS. But part of the challenges in addressing the stigma related to PrEP has been they believe that PrEP is for sex workers only by the society, and the misinformation on PrEP and ARVs to the AGYW. We also realize that there's insufficient knowledge on PrEP and PEP as a prevention method for adolescent girls and young women. I realized that the Kenya education curriculum has not included PrEP use as a prevention method to be taught to in schools. Therefore, there's a big gap in information regarding PrEP use and PEP as compared to other prevention methods for HIV and AIDS. So some of the success in addressing the stigma related to PrEP among the AGYW is we are seeing adolescents and young women going for PrEP do not receive the PrEP medication packaged in the bottles, but they have been repackaged. So no one could really discover that you're on PrEP or you're using PrEP. So it has really helped reduce the stigma around the PrEP use. Plus also as a country, we have seen PrEP is no longer being offered at the art centers only, but at the pharmaceuticals and the local pharmacies in any local hospital. You'll be able to receive PrEP. So these are some of the interventions that have been made to really reduce to really make the PrEP intervention success in Kenya. So that's all I had to share on my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Damaris, for that insight. Do we have any questions from from our participants in the room? Maybe I could start with some of the questions that are being raised in the chat room, on the issues of introduction of PrEP and how that has affected us as in PrEP uptake in our countries. And Hasina, you want to say something? Sorry.
Good afternoon,
Yes,
and thank you for the
yes.
presentations. I think it's really good to hear, from the ground what is actually influencing PrEP uptake. In South Africa, although we started with PrEP initially with sex workers and then moved on to men who have sex with men and then to AGYW, we were very, very cautious about the messaging from the beginning, and making sure that the messaging was never that PrEP was for a particular group of people, either sex workers, MSM, or young people. But in terms of the materials we used material that people could identify with. And what we also found was really very useful, and this was in all of the different population groups that we're trying to reach, is using peers along the way. And I think, using peers and especially for young people, having and we have groundbreakers that are at the clinics that provide that information, using the BWise app, as well as having Facebook and Twitter and having a web page where people can access information easily, really did help. And another big area that assisted us was using characters from soapies, from local soapies that people could identify with, young people, and woven into that story. And I think some of you may have seen the MTV Sugar series, where there was a young person in the series that was on PrEP. And I think those kinds of things really did demystify PrEP. But one big area that helped, and we're seeing it especially in the more rural areas, is that before you actually start offering PrEP to young people, to actually educate the local community and the influences in that community, like the religious leaders, the traditional leaders, the parents and the teachers. And what we found in those instances, the uptake was a lot better because it was supported by people who influence decisions of young people, or influence what young people will want to take up or not take up. So I think those were just some of the strategies we used to destigmatize the uptake of oral PrEP. The one question I have for these speakers is, you know, how many of the young people that you engaged with would indicated that they would consider the more long-acting methods, like the injectable or the dapivirine ring, because those are much more discreet, and you know, it reduces the pill burden. And those are some of the things that a lot of our young people that in focus group discussions have indicated that they would prefer to taking a pill a day. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't know, Dr. Wema, would you like to take that question on the long-acting Kabele and dapivirine ring? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that comment and question. And I agree with you that I think things need to happen at the multi-level, in all the different various levels, not just focusing on the AGYW, but really working to sensitize the community in conjunction with working with the AGYW. So that does need to happen with community leaders. Yes, regarding the long acting, so we didn't, with our review, we didn't interview AGYW directly, we just did a synthesis, but we did come across a number of articles that talked about AGYW interest in the long acting, just exactly for the reason you said, is that it is less stigmatizing. They don't have to carry the pills around, so, and they would have to go to the facilities less frequently. So there is definitely interest in the long acting among the AGYW.
All right, thank you for that. I think Margaret Kagashi, you want to say something? Your hand is up.
Thank you. I wanted to add on the long acting. It's actually, we did not publish it as just a small evaluation looking at the long acting for AGYW. And we looked at which family planning they consider most. And we find out that the injection, they consider it most. So we figured out, now let's have a look on if they consider family planning, which is injectable, more than the pills and all that. We said, okay, I think reducing the pills burden to them and all that, where to keep them, because keeping those drugs at home and all that it's a bit challenges. They don't have that privacy, but we have vulnerable groups which are actually, they live in the community homes and houses. So we were asked, like, how do you think the long acting, if comes in, will you take that? Definitely we'll take that. Most of the 70% of those we were just chatting around during the meetings, they said, I think long acting to be a solution to this. So yeah.
Thank you for that input. I think it's the same comments that have come from South Africa on the use of the long-acting drug, because it reduces on the issue of pill burden. And also, I think one of the stigma types that came up was the peers and the partners seeing them taking the drugs and probably thinking they're HIV infected instead of it being a PrEP measure. So yes, that's one of the issues that's coming up. Do we have any comments from Zimbabwe? You just approved your Kabele in November. last year. I don't know, how is that going in the country? What are your experiences on the long acting as well as the oral PrEP really in the country? Anyone from Zimbabwe want to say something on the same? Any experiences from our countries on the issues of the introduction of PrEP in the country, our experiences on the same, and the uptake, especially among the AGYW? How are we faring on? What are the experiences there? Any insights? Yes.
Yeah, and I'm also quite curious, you know, when we did the Menti, the results show that the greatest challenge that you face in programming is the stigma from providers. So just curious to hear people's experiences in working with stigma among providers.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Weima. I think from other studies we've seen, one of the reasons, I don't know whether I would call it the self-imposed stigma, or I don't know how to call it, where they feel probably because of the way the healthcare worker perceives by taking the PrEP, then my PrEP, sorry, that will probably make me not come back for the next, for the fill up, or maybe next time to get some more PrEP. I don't know. I think that's one of the things that we've had with our adolescents and young people, some of the issues that they raise when it comes to PrEP. And I think also Juma also talked about how the knowledge and the information on PrEP is still low among the adolescents and the young people, leading to the low uptake of PrEP in the country. Yeah, but I think one of the biggest things that we had to face was the introduction, how it was introduced, and how people view PrEP as, and how what they relate PrEP to. I think also led to the picture that we've seen when it comes to PrEP uptake. Do we have any insights, any questions, any comments, concerns on the same from our participants in the room? Hasina, you want to say something?
Yeah, nobody's saying anything, so let me talk. I think, I think the question you asked about, uptake of PrEP amongst adolescent girls and young women. If we look at our data from South Africa, we still have the highest number of PrEP uptake amongst young women aged 15 to 19 and 20 to 24. And then followed by ages 25 to 34. So we're seeing good uptake. And, I think that perhaps the strategies being used to promote PrEP amongst young people seems to be working, especially if we look at the uptake in these age groups. What we do have in South Africa is, and looking at promoting youth-friendly services. And in there's a very strong drive to have youth zones at each one of our public primary healthcare facilities, which is actually a dedicated time for young people to come into the clinic. So those are adjustable times, either late in the afternoon when school ends, or maybe over the weekend, and that is when all of the services are offered, not just PrEP. And, I think we have the same kind of challenge with contraception, with STI management, and with a whole range of other services that young people are not accessing because, a medical facility or a health facility is not something that young people want to congregate at. So these youth zones are fairly they seem to be attracting young people because they have other activities associated with the actual clinic service delivery. And I think that helps a great deal. And then also with some of our partners having safe spaces, which is outside of the health facility that also promotes offering these kinds of services. Thank you.
Maybe I could ask you a question because you seem to have a lot of information on PrEP uptake in South Africa. You talked about utilizing social media. I don't know, would you want to go deeper into that? How you're using social media to increase PrEP uptake among the young people? How do you go about it, for instance?
Okay, do you want me to respond?
Yes, please.
Okay, so with social media, you have to be very creative. So what we do have is both on our BY's website and on the PrEP Facebook page, you'll find that it drives traffic both ways. So from the BY's platform, it will drive traffic into the social media platform and vice versa. But we do have a chatbot called Sister Unati, and people feel safe asking a chatbot questions, who's less judgmental, who can provide that information. So that has been a useful one. We also have short video clips with promotional material on there, little videos talking about, feeling empowered by protecting themselves. So really having very positive messages as opposed to, sort of the scare of HIV and people taking control of their health. So I think those are some of the things that has worked quite well, and we're seeing quite a lot of uptake. And this was particularly useful during COVID, during the lockdowns, because a lot of young people didn't have access to health facilities. They didn't know where to go. So the social media platforms were very popular at that time. And we're seeing the sort of the use of those platforms being, sort of maintained even post-COVID. So I think that this is something that we would need to continually monitor and see how we can develop it further. But it will also be useful to hear from other countries whether, social media is as popular as it is amongst the South African youth. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think Natalie would like to add comment on the same, I guess. Natalie Blahakis.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I'm Natalie, work in Zambia with a local NGO called CIDES. Basically, we work with the National Technical Working Group for PrEP as well, but generally, some of the experience, for example, especially for AGYWs, we do see that age of consent is still an issue. There was talk about stigma in the discussion earlier on, and we do see stigma, especially in the mainstream facilities, when AGYWs go to a local facility to access these services. But what we have seen is when we provide a service in a safe space for the adolescents, so either a youth-friendly space, the dream sites, where the adolescents and young people basically feel more at home or feel more comfortable and surrounded by individuals that are, similar as themselves or peers. There is, can I say, more willingness to be able to receive the service. In Lusaka, in Zambia, we've been, I guess, piloting and scaling up linkage of high risk negatives to prevention. And we see good uptake by AGYWs at the beginning, but then, that sustaining them on PrEP for those that do remain at risk has been an issue. And what we would like to do is more in-depth interviews, I think, with themselves to better understand what their limitations are, what the gaps are for them to continue accessing the service, and whether we need to create a different environment or some form of DSD models that can really cater for their needs. So that is the experience I wanted to share. Over, and thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And also bringing up some of the other challenges, I guess, that probably never made it here, that we are facing in our countries, like the issue of consent. I know Tanzania has done a lot of work on consent and young people in terms of HIV prevention services. In some of our countries, I think we are going backwards, where the consent issue keeps getting worse and worse, and maybe also bringing up the issue of reduction in service uptake in the countries when we to adolescents. To move on to our last Mentimeter and look at reflections on this topic, and also what is happening in our countries on the same. Please go to the website, www.menti.com, and enter the codes. Let's get your reflections. All your responses are anonymous, so feel free to comment. Thank you everyone for your responses. How useful did you find this session on a scale of 1 to 5? Oh, 4.8. 1 is not very useful and 5 is very useful. 4.5. Thank you so much, Hasina, for your comments, as well as the information given us on South Africa. Feel you're quite ahead when it comes to PrEP implementation, and we'll be looking out for support as well as mentorship on how you're doing it in your country. Thank you. 4.5. Thank you for your reflections, for listening in. How likely are you to use the information from this session in your work and or share with your colleagues? Great. 4.5. 4.6. Thank you so much for your feedback. And thank you to our presenters. That was some great information. And looking at stigma and how to deal with it when it comes to PrEP, because I think that's one of the biggest hindrances in PrEP uptake among the adolescent girls and young women. 4.6. How does the information provided in this session impact your work? Are we directly dealing with PrEP? Is it a policy? Is it useful for design of programs for our adolescent girls and young women? Great. Design relevant information to access for future literature searching. Great. Future projects. Brilliant. Framework. It's very useful. Just help It will help us inform our national HIV response. Great. Design, great. Yeah, we do share common challenges as countries represented here. And it was great to hear some of the innovative ways that we can deal with these challenges. For planning, definitely policy design, technical guidance, real world experiences from peers. Such great answers. Thank you so much for your response. Would like to assess some of the PrEP introduction strategies. We need to know what these are: reducing stigma and fully reduce the potential of PrEP. Yeah, it seems like this is one of the main challenges that came up with PrEP introduction in our countries. But from the insights given, I think we have been able to manage some of these challenges, or we are working on it. Thank you so much for that. All right. Thank you for your responses. All right. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your reflections from your own programs. And thank you, Dr. Weima and Lulama, for the great presentation. It was such an eye-opener for all of us. Thank you to our champions from the different countries in East and Southern Africa, and also to our presenters. Thank you to SYCONA, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, SSLN, and GPC for this opportunity. I hope we have all been able to learn something from this, and it's something that we're going to move forward and help in planning and implement. So we'd like to close the webinar unless there's anything else. Yes, Dr. Weima?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and we've really enjoyed getting the feedback from your own, hands-on experiences in the country. So thanks for joining.
All right. Thank you so much for joining, and see you next time. Thank you, colleagues. Bye. Thank you.